Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am on Trafalgar Square in London. Behind me is the equestrian statue of George IV, a king who does not hold public affection really, is not so well known, very much overshadowed by his father George III, who reigned for 60 years, and indeed his niece Victoria, who came more than one after him and reigned for 64 years. So who is this all but forgotten monarch? The thing is, he was known as the Prince Regent for a long time. So he was born in 1762, and his father was George III, as I pointed out. So he and his father had a famously dysfunctional father-son relationship. His father, who was hidebound conservative, who was a choleric personality, was very dutiful, who was uxorious and so on, and George III, who was the opposite in many ways, who was a womanizer, who was a wild spender, who was irresponsible, self-indulgent and so forth. And his father very much favoured the Tories. George IV favoured the Whigs. Not that he was terribly politically minded, but anything to dish his father. And in 1788 it became evident that his father was mentally ill, probably suffering from porphyria. There's another theory that was actually some of the chemicals in wigs affected George III's mental health. Anyway, so Dr. Willis took George III away to work in his farm, where he was not exempted from labour. The king actually had to toil with his hands, and that helped his recovery. But anyway, a Regency Act was passed, and George IV became king in all but name. His father's mental illness was intermittent. He'd be barking mad for a few months, he would return to mental health for a while, then he'd be insane and blah blah blah. So Regency is from 1788 onwards, really until 1820, until George III died and William IV became king proper. So he's best known for his liaison, well, not best known, one of the things he's known for is his liaison with Mrs. Maria Fitzherbert, who was twice divorced. The thing is, she was Roman Catholic, and of course the royal family were not permitted to marry Catholics, and there was widespread anti-Catholicism in this country at the time. In 1780 there had been the Gordon riots, when the Catholic Relief Bill was put forward to try and get rid of anti-Catholic discrimination in law. Lord George Gordon, he led huge protests, and then there were riots and Catholic property was smashed and burned and blah blah blah. So anyway, George IV couldn't marry Maria Fitzherbert. There are rumours he did actually secretly marry her, but it wouldn't be legal because the Royal Marriages Act, he would have required the express permission of his pater, and that would never be forthcoming. His father, George III, said he wouldn't allow Catholic emancipation. That's the most Jacobanical thing I ever heard of, said George III. The Jacobins being the extreme wing of the French revolutionaries. So George IV, as I say, he wielded a very considerable power in the 1790s, when his father was sometimes incapacitated on account of his mental delinquency. George IV was very irresponsible with money, and one of the things he needed from Parliament was more cash. The civil list voted, so spending money for him, and he built Clarence House and various other gorgeous residences here in London, also his pavilion at Brighton. So he later married a German princess with whom he had a notoriously bad relationship and indeed a divorce, Queen Caroline. It was a scandal of the 1820s, and he had her briefly imprisoned, and she fled back to Germany. And did she have a paramour? They had a daughter, but the daughter died young. So George IV rather, died unmourned in 1830, and the radical pamphleteer, orator Leigh Hunt, orator was a sobriquet, Leigh Hunt wrote that in half a century the Prince Regent has done nothing for us to be remotely grateful for, and this kind of thing. This was lèse majesté. So Leigh Hunt was indeed imprisoned for this criminal libel of His Royal Highness. So he was masterfully portrayed in The Madness of King George by Rupert Everett. That is George the IV. And this equestrian statue, there's some sort of code to them having that hoof up. I'm not sure what that says about the subject of the statue, but there we are. I can't think of any other statues of George IV, who was largely unmourned Perhaps quite a fun person, not terribly responsible. He did at least go to Scotland after he inherited the crown. His father never left southeast England, so the monarchy became much more popular up there. Sir Walter Scott organised a pageant to welcome His Britannic Majesty, and indeed the kilt was popularised by that. So that is George IV.